Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Identity Factor podcast. My name is Robin Kiesler, and I will be your host. Let's
Today,
go.
we are going to be continuing this conversation around leadership, identity, and mental health. And we're going to jump right in with one of my favorite coaches, Mr. Dex Randall. He's the host of the Burnout to Leadership podcast. But one of the things that I love about the work that Dex does so much is really that he focuses so much on helping people reconnect with themselves and the truth of who they really are and their good heart. And I love your podcast, Dex, and I love all the work that you do. So I'm very honored to have you here today. And if there's anything else that you'd like to say as far as to introduce yourself, go right ahead. Otherwise, I'd love to just dive in and pick your brain around this conversation.
No, we're good. Thank you.
Okay, sounds perfect. Well, let's dive in. First thing, Dex, I would like to start with sort of defining some terms, if that's okay. So
Sure.
first of all, can we start with what it means to be a leader?
I think really a leader is somebody who draws performance from the people that they work with. And it also is the glue, the cultural glue that binds them together towards a common vision. But I think of it really, leadership is really pulling out performance from the people who are working around you.
And what are the ways that people do that we like? And what are the ways that people do that we don't like?
Good question. Well, I think it's grounded in emotional and psychological safety for me. The more and more safety you can create, the more you can invite people to participate at the highest possible level of contribution, the higher and higher they'll perform, and the stronger and stronger their loyalty and common efforts will be. So high performing teams are really the teams that trust one another, that are all active contributors. Nobody feels they can't participate. Everybody brings their best creative, freewheeling, challenging ideas. And for that, you have to have safety. So a leader, really, the leader of the highest performing team will be the one who trusts and empowers and respects and draws answers from all of the people around them. Because really, it's scientifically proven, a diverse team will always outperform an individual, doesn't matter how smart the individual is. So if the leader wants to be the one with all the answers, it's a very self-limiting situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, if they're very dictatorial, if they're like, you're going to do what I say,
right.
no performance ever really flourished.
Totally.
There. People won't grow. People won't expand. They won't challenge the status quo. They won't bring new ideas. Innovation always sits on safety.
I love that. How can you create more safety as a leader, do you think?
Well, there's a foundation kind of set of rules of psychological safety, but the first one of those is inclusion. It needs to be a flat playing field where everybody is seen as being deserving, as having the same human status. That's kind of inclusion safety. That's the first thing, as being allowed to have a voice. Everybody has the same voice. Everybody is expected to be candid and honest with one another, regardless of rank.
Yeah.
So it needs to be a flat organization.
Yeah.
And then we start looking at what encourages contributor safety. How can people feel safe enough to pipe up and give their ideas with no humiliation, no blame, no shaming of the people? And then you kind of draw people up into that.
I love it.
Inclusion, a very warm and non-judgmental inclusion, which encourages every voice and encourages people to dissent if they don't agree with something that's happening. They're encouraged to challenge the status quo, because that's how you find problems, solve them.
Totally. Yeah. And that's how we grow. That's how we learn. Like it's one of the things whenever I'm teaching, I remember I was teaching a workshop one time on relationships, and we were talking about boundaries and manual and all the things. And some of that stuff can feel kind of controversial, right? Where people are like, bullshit, And I remember there's this one particularly argumentative human that was in the workshop, but I loved it, right? And every time she would bring a question, or I don't think that jives, or how, it's like, I was like, oh yeah, like let's talk about it. And And at one point in the end, that was one of the things she said. She's like, I love how, and there was never a moment where I was like, I wish she would stop arguing. I wish she would stop bringing up all these, trying to poke holes in what I'm teaching or in what I'm doing, because I want people to poke holes, because that's how you find answers. That's how you begin to expand your thinking and the things that you're, right? Like, it's how everything becomes stronger, I think.
Yeah, we have to conquer our sense of risk or threat in a workplace, particularly if we feel inhibited. We're never going to be able to bring of our best as individuals. So
yeah,
it's a difficult one because most of us do feel a little bit afraid and anxious about certain things at work. Sometimes the power structure, sometimes just a person who feels they must combat
yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah,
Job loss. Obviously, we fear job loss
yeah.
as well.
Loss of respect, loss of authority, loss of love sometimes, even if right, job loss, that's like a financial security, but it's like, I think there's so much that goes into that. And again, identity, I think for people that are, I think especially for people socialized as men in our society, Brene Brown talked about this when she talked about vulnerability. It's like there's this idea that for men, it's like I have to be the knight on the white horse, right? And it's like she talked openly about that guy who was like, when she was doing her book signing for the daughters, and she said something about, oh, I don't work with men or something like that. He goes, well, isn't that convenient for you?
I remember that.
And it was so convicting for her, right? And she's like, he's 100% right. He's like, you're talking about vulnerability, and yet my daughter and my wife would rather see me, die a bloody death than to not be that knight in shining armor. And I thought that was just such an interest. I mean, to talk honestly about these, what we were talking about before we hit record, like the stigma of mental health is here for a reason, right? And we can like to pretend and talk pretty about getting rid of the stigma, quote unquote, but let's be real. I also think there are people that don't want to get rid of the stigma, just like racism, just like all these other isms. They are serving a purpose in this society structure in America and in different places across the world that it has been created, right? I don't think it's here by accident. It was constructed by humans, right? So that's an interesting whole other conversation. Like, what is it? Why is it that the people who are protecting this status quo, why is it that they want this stigma around mental health? I don't know
How very convenient it is, as you say. It's an acknowledgement of differentness. You're different than me, and I don't understand that, and I'm scared I might be a bit the same. I might have components in me that aren't quite mentally healthy. That would be uncomfortable.
Yeah,
So
brilliant.
I have to reject that in you because I'm also rejecting it in me. That's the basis of any ism, really, isn't it?
Isn't it? Duh. You say it now, it's so obvious, but you're right. Yeah. And that's actually what, with the shadow side, it's one of the things that Debbie Ford, when she taught this work, of course, this came from Carl Jung, and there's a lot of people, Deepak Chopra, who have done shadow work. But it's like when she talks about it, that's really what it's all about, is that we reject these things in other people because we haven't made peace with them in ourselves. Right. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Because there's no space for us to do that. There's no arena where we can do that, generally speaking, in public.
Yeah. So when we talk about leadership and the way that you kind of just defined that and talked about some of those pieces, how does neurodiversity fit into that when we talk about differentness, right? So mental health is a way that people are seen as quote unquote different, dangerous. Therefore, we have to isolate skin color, sexuality, right? There's all these ways that we divide people and put them in boxes and then put them in their perspective corners. So how does that relate to this conversation around neurodiversity?
Well, I think that's where we talk about a little bit about DEI, because any kind of diversity will contribute to the bottom line of a team, unless the leader is too scared to inhabit that space and welcome those people. But really, these different styles of being, different life experiences, different ways of thinking and responding to the world are what contribute kind of dimension to productivity, to performance, to ideas, to innovation. It kind of, you get a much deeper, more vivid, more holistic solution to a problem when you have diversity in the team, because they will start asking different questions than one another.
Yeah.
And it really rounds out the possibility of having a robust solution rather than a mono thinking solution, which is, I know the best way to do this because when I did it 10 years ago, it worked like this.
Yeah.
which is kind of one old-fashioned leadership style. I know how to do this, and I'm going to tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
It's in the past I've had this experience, but now success in business, because of the speed of technology change, rests on innovation. If you're not innovating, then your competitive advantage will quickly wear out.
Yeah.
So diversity, and including neurodiversity, people who have a different take on the world and life and have different experiences to draw on, will really add to your competitive advantage. And this is the same for anybody in any stigmatized sector of society. They're going to bring a radically different perspective and experience in life that will help you kind of move through any limitations of your business development and your leadership. And I think that, and it's scientifically proven that that contributes to your bottom line, but I think as well, it's uncomfortable for many of us because we have our internal judgment of all of that, but it's actually very, very powerful. And I think also for people who've had mental health challenges, their journey to work with those challenges has led them down a path of self-expansion and growth. That's developed assets in them that they may not have had if they've had this kind of vanilla, non-eventful life.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a couple things that you said, and hopefully my brain, little ADD brain, speaking of that, will be able to keep track of all these ideas, because there are so many things just now that came up as I was listening to you talking. The first thing, which I'll say and then try to move on from quickly, is that, again, when you're talking about leadership and leaders, that are willing to pull in all that diversity, it makes everything so much richer. And I'm thinking of the differences of leaders who are willing to do that versus leaders who won't. And I think, for me, it really comes down to this idea of, what is their center? What is their goal? What is their purpose? Like, what's their why? Because when I look at certain, leaders and political figures and things like that, it's like, even just, like all the Trumpian bullshit, to be honest, right? Like, I don't go into a ton of politics, really. And it doesn't mean that the people who support them aren't sometimes people that I love, even though some are more challenging than others. But it's like, but when I look at that, just that leadership style, to me, there's just something about that is so, it's about that my impression is that human is not really here to make the world a better place for everyone else, right? It's about ego and power and right and leaving that mark, versus the leaders who are here. I'll throw out another fun, you guys are going to get to know me a little bit better today. I'll throw out another fun analogy, right? Like, I'm not huge into the BDSM stuff. However, I did watch a documentary about it one time, and they were talking about like dominatrix, and like a good dominatrix is like, how sometimes they're like, or like they will like tell people, okay, what you're going to wear. It's like when you're quote unquote doming someone, right? And they're like, if I'm ever the person that this documentary was about, she was like, if I'm ever doming someone, she's like, I get to be in control and say what's going to happen and all these things. But she's like, a good dom cares about the experience of the person that they're doming. And so she's like, you're really doing it for them. Does that make sense? So it's like, I'm not making decisions that I'm going to enjoy. I'm making decisions that's going to make this person's experience better. And same like within a political sense or anything, right? As you're leading, it's like, when I care, even about this summit or the things that I'm doing, if all I care about is my experience and me getting what I want out of this, the way that all of that gets implemented is going to be a very different unfolding, as opposed to if I think about what's going to make Dex's experience here a good one, what's going to make, Jessica's experience and Cam and all the people that are participating, when I'm thinking about them and when I'm thinking about the listeners and when I'm thinking about all of that, it makes the experience richer, because it's not coming from me and my ego. Does that make sense? Maybe that was all incredibly.
I'll take it one step further if you like.
Yeah.
Using your example, or using your two examples, Trump and BDSM, can't imagine why they came up in the same sentence. So I think really the dynamic of doming somebody goes a long way beyond care. What you're really doing is you're really seeing as much as possible of the entire human. You're seeing really deeply inside that person, what their needs are, what their drivers are. I consider it to be a very deep connection. There's nothing superficial about it. You're going right down deep and seeing the whole person, caring for the whole person. I think of that as an expression of love. And I think of leadership the same way. Leadership, really good leadership, functional, performative, even money-making leadership is bonding a team into a really tight social unit that is performant. This is also an act of love. Like when people come to me in burnout, the thing they're suffering from is disconnection from humans. They're in a lot of pain and they're very withdrawn and isolated and cut off, and they're still trying to bosh it all out, but they're not feeling it. They're not feeling the reward because they're so disconnected from themselves and from other people. That's why I talk about heart-centered leadership, because it turns out that's what wins on every single level you care to name, but it's also deeply connecting and rewarding. It's fun. You can have joy, you can have connection, you can have the kind of experience of work that's passionate and engaged because you're willing to connect with people and you're willing to cherish your people and nurture your people, particularly nurture and mentor your people. Yes. And guess what? That feels good.
Yes.
It feels good. So when we look at then Trump, who I've seen described as narcissistic, this rampant power grab and need for control comes from fear. I'm so scared I'm going to control and manipulate and take every bit of power I can get my hands on so I can feel a bit more safe. It's completely illusory. It's momentary, it's fleeting. Any control you think you gain in the moment, a second later it's gone, you need a bit more. That desperate quest for control doesn't feel good inside. It doesn't create internal safety.
No, not at all. It doesn't.
Because it's disconnecting again. It's taking power.
Yeah.
So I think it's unfortunate people who are trapped in that place.
Yeah.
Trump is not a happy man.
Yeah. And it's like, and when you look at, because I believe that at the essence of every human, like you said, you talked about, like, I think safety is a core human need. And so we can talk about what our needs are, but I believe that at our essence, truly, like, that we are all like love, like that love is the essence of who we are as humans. Even Donald Trump, even any of these political figures, it's like that is exactly what he is. And it was a hard thing for me to get my head around for such a long time. But all these behaviors, right? No matter whatever political figure you're talking about, or person, or coworker, or anyone, it's like any ugly behavior, even in my life, like I've had for sure my own ugly, and I still do sometimes. But it's like anytime that ugly is coming out, and this is where the shadow, right? This is why, and we can talk about this in a second, those parts of us that we don't love, that we would rather hide. It's like, I believe that even in those moments, grasping for power, like you said, the essence of that behavior is love, but it's that person trying to love that child inside that's hurting. And so here they're like, I'm going to protect you by creating this persona of power and control, and whatever it is, they're not, I don't think, it's not condoning any of this behavior or anything like that, and it's destructive. But sometimes those destructive mechanisms that we adopt them because we don't know what else to do.
I would essentially agree. I regard each human being as intrinsically perfect. Mm-hmm. Like I would agree that babies are born perfect. They must be, right? Even if they're wired differently, even if they have, generational trauma or something like that. And so when they have fear and trauma in their lives, our response to that is a fearful one. So if we exhibit bad behavior, we've learned it to try and protect ourselves from that fear that we have inside. So all bad behavior is just a habit we've cultivated because we don't feel good inside. It's not because we're bad people.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're trying.
I believe even an adult, even Trump, even anybody who's exhibiting what would publicly be agreed as poor behavior, it's just a person who's scared.
100%. It's a person who's scared, and they're trying to find the best way to love themselves that they know how, because they probably didn't get it from anywhere else. And so they didn't have
not even love. Survival comes first.
Yeah. But I think that survival and protection is a form of love, right? Like for me, like it's like, that's why would you don't protect something that you don't love, right?
Well, the survival instinct is animalistic, so it's really,
Just wired in.
well, it is wired in. It's our base instinct. So whether it go, and I mean, really, the animal, the lizard brain, the survival brain is beneath the emotional brain. It fires first. Survival always comes before love. Not that we wouldn't love ourselves.
Yeah.
Most of us have learned not to be very good at it, but it's not that we wouldn't do it. But I think survival is,
Yeah.
the amygdala fires before any other part of the brain. So
Yeah.
that's how I think about it.
I think about it for me, like when I like when my amygdala is triggered and something is trying to protect me, like when I'm in that survival mode. I guess what I mean by that is like the way that I think about it is like I notice, those protective personalities, those protective mechanisms that get triggered. I guess I just see them as as a as like a team, if you will, of people that are there to love and protect that part of me that feels vulnerable or that feels like it's being threatened, So I guess I'm thinking when I'm using that word, I'm using more of an action word than a feeling word.
Right.
Like, but I don't know, just something that I have considered. And I wonder, because it's like, I don't know, like how is this thing trying to nurture? How is this thing trying to protect? How is this thing trying to help me survive? And
And I think of the inner critic in that way as well. The purpose of the inner critic is to protect us from risk and harm.
yeah.
It does it in a lousy way by criticizing us, telling us we're doing wrong.
Yes.
But the instinct behind it is to protect us. And it's something we pick up pretty early in life because we learn from our caregivers, our parents, whoever, this is the way a good human behaves. This is what a good human does. This is what a good human does not do. And thereafter in life, we're like, oh no, I'm not following the rules. Something's going to go horribly wrong.
Yes.
And that's where the inner critic comes in. Self-correct, you're doing this. You should not eat too much food. You should not punch the boy in the next desk.
Yeah. Yes.
Because that's a survival mechanism as well. So I believe everything about us is oriented to healing and survival.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
believe that intrinsically we can also return to our perfect good heart at any time. It's always there. Nobody's got a bad heart.
Yeah.
Nobody's fundamentally ill-intentioned. They just have coping mechanisms that went a bit sideways.
Yeah. Sometimes a lot sideways.
Sometimes a little sideways.
But even then, I would say that I don't think it's their fault. I think it's, it doesn't mean that they can't and shouldn't, in my opinion, take responsibility for that as an adult. But there are so many things that we have wired into us, like you said, and things that we learn and coping mechanisms and ways that we try to survive. And it's like, we live in a world where, as we're specifically talking about mental health, we can kind of circle back to that. It's like, just to notice that there are so many things at work here that are far beyond us that impact our mental health and our ability to really manage our mental health. And so, and I think that might be a definition worth really even taking a minute to define. When we talk about mental health, first of all, what does that mean? And second of all, I think this would be an awesome conversation to have, Dex, about this idea. We were talking about this before we hopped on, this idea of the Shadow Side Leadership Summit, right? And there were a few people that expressed like concern around talking about it in that way. And the concern is this, that, and I asked myself this question because it got brought up, like, am I, or are we unintentionally contributing to the stigma, right? Because I think one of the things about mental health that's such a bummer is that when we talk about mental health, people think of it as mental illness, which I don't think is true. I think mental health is so much bigger than that, right? Joy is a part of mental health. Love is a part of mental health, all of it. Like, it's a spectrum. But sometimes we do have mental health challenges and we kind of end up in these places that we don't want to be in, and we get stuck there for a long time, and we don't really know, no one's taught us, like you said a second ago, how to not get stuck there. No one's taught us how to process an emotion and how to support ourselves and how to love ourselves when we're going through a challenge, and to be able to kind of come back over to more of a neutral emotion or where we want to be. So the concern was like, okay, if we're talking about the shadow side, I know what I mean by that, right? The shadow side to me is all the parts of me that I'm ashamed of or that I don't want someone to see, right? The parts of me that I feel society would label as bad or wrong. And so, but again, my relationship with those shadow parts of myself has actually been such a beautiful experience. And so I've gotten to the point now where I really, when I talk about the shadow side, it invokes a feeling of love inside of me because I have such a loving relationship. And so the intent was to destigmatize that and to just invite everyone to say, you know what, each and every one of us has all of this, right? It's the 50-50, the ugly and the beautiful, the joy and the pain, the day and the night, right? Like it's just all part of who we are as humans. So I have a very loving, affectionate relationship with that. And my intention was to just to give other people permission to bring theirs forward as well, and to know that it's safe and that it's okay. So Dex, I just would turn it over to you and see if you have, what have been your thoughts, your experiences around that, and how would you describe your relationship to, again, the shadow parts of yourself, if you will, and how they potentially have really served you, and what are the real things about it that are scary, where maybe we should be cognizant of informing people to know that it's okay if they're wanting to hide it.
Okay, that was a lot of questions. I'll try and answer some of them. Firstly, I don't really subscribe to the concept of a shadow side, because this is where our shame comes from. If we detect that we're different in an unacceptable way that will be stigmatized, then we will experience shame and we will hide this piece of ourselves, and we'll develop coping mechanisms to compensate for that. So I think even the term shadow side is very fraught, even though people listening or watching may identify with that, which is good because it means you're in the right place, we're having the right discussion, and we can show the upside of that. But I think still it's almost saying you've got a shadow side, so there's a piece of you that's acceptable, then there's this other piece that's not acceptable, and you should be quietly tidying it away because it's uncomfortable for me to experience you having that. I don't want to see that. That's not emotionally safe for me to know you've got that piece of you. So you need to tidy that away privately, which is why so many of us grow up in shame and don't get the attention or healing that we really require for any mental health associated challenges that we have. Because as well, if we call it a shadow side, I'm not two people. I don't have a good bit and a bad bit. I'm just one person. And maybe I've got some acquired impairments that I can't do anything about, but I'm still just one person. And I think of it like this, like you wouldn't call it my shadow side to have cancer. And yet it's something that I would have to live with and work with in my life. And you could stigmatize me for that if you want. I'm just one person. I'm wired differently from you. So I think of this as all of us are on a path really to find self-acceptance if we are stigmatized, particularly for our mental health. We're on a path to find acceptance, and that's not a very easy path because of the stigma itself, because there are risks involved in disclosing something that might be diagnosable, for example. It separates us. We have coping mechanisms and they separate us too. So I think part of the healing journey of finding a way to work with other people who do accept you towards healing, towards self-acceptance, towards living with the exact person you are, that journey is so important. And I think what we're doing now is making a vehicle for people to have access to the idea that that's an okay thing to do, that there are people who will support you, that it's perfect, whatever your experience is, however you're wired, whatever that might look like in the DSM is okay, right? You can find the richness of your life to be sufficient for you. You can find your good heart like you and I have explored in our individual lives. We can find our heart inside of that, and you're still enough.
Hey, if you're enjoying this episode, I want to invite you to come join us on May 19th through the 21st for the Shadowside Leadership Summit. It's going to be an entire weekend where we're going to dive into these conversations around identity and leadership, around mental and emotional health, around how to support ourselves so that we can truly lead others in a more impactful way, that we also get to experience connection and joy along the journey. ShadowsideLeadershipSummit.com. Go sign up and we'll see you inside.
But the stigma is real. I myself I've lost a job because of my mental health. And I've been stigmatized in other ways, called out for my mental health as if it's something that I could or should fix. And I think that that's unreasonable, but it's still quite prevalent. And I think as well, people need to find a safe place to explore how to work with what they think of as their own mental health challenges or neurodiversity or whatever that experience is. In coaching, the way we approach anybody is, number one, you're already perfect. Number two, I unconditionally love and accept you exactly the way you are now without needing to change or fix anything. This idea of trying to be the best version of yourself is a self-aggression. It's like, I don't accept myself now, but when I'm over there, I will. I don't subscribe to that either. Like, no, you're already perfect. You can sink back into it. You don't need to run away. And all of that's available. It's available, but it's available by talking to the right people, by disclosing your difficulties and your fears only to a person who will hold them gently and carefully with you. Yes. Not by just going around willy-nilly going.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, and she says like vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability, right? And so it's like there are things that I share sometimes, and with my community or whatever that feel pretty vulnerable, but it's like it's always, again, coming back to that place. Like I always check in with myself first, like, why am I sharing this? Is it for their benefit, right? I'm not trying to trauma bond with anyone here. Like, is there something here that's for your benefit? And then also, there are some things that I don't share, right? Some of the things that I share, it's like, those are experiences that I don't think it has to do with old or new or how the timeline, because time doesn't heal, right? It's not about time. It's about you having gone in and healed your belief systems and your identity around the thing. But so the things that I share are things that I'm okay with any outcome, right? Like I was saying, like, so before I go and I share something, like, am I willing, like this may not go well, and am I okay with that? And this could also bring us closer together. There could be more connection, more intimacy on the other side of this. And so that's great if that happens, but am I willing to accept the honest reality that sometimes when you share parts of yourself with the world, they will reject you. They will reject it. They will shove it away. And there may very well be very tangible consequences based on that. So it makes sense that people are afraid.
And it does make sense. And I think it's very important to see if you can find somebody who will give a safe container to your exploration. Because underneath any challenges of any kind you may have, there's a heart of gold. The self-connection you can find when you really accept that this is who you are and that that's wonderful, it's perfect as it is. The self-connection and the love you can find is worth everything. And the creativity and the spirit that comes out there and the possibilities that explode for you once you agree with yourself that you're perfect. But it's finding a container for that, I think, is very important.
Yeah.
And sometimes it backfires. The journey backfires. I've certainly had it backfire on me and found people who I thought would help me, but who have actually traumatized me.
Yeah. So Dex, if that's the case, and we all have had those experiences, to just know that that is a real truth, then why would we bother? Is there an upside? Is there a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow that we're like, wanting to find? Is it just fake? Or is there something truly real there where it's like, okay, you know what? I had 10 bad experiences or whatever, but then there was this one where it's like, because in my experience, man, a lot of pain there, a lot of stuff like where it has not gone well. And at the same time, when I do find my people, like for me, there has been such healing there.
And for me too. And I think it becomes about full self-expression. There's such joy in that, just being relaxed in who you really truly are. Finding out who you are, for one thing, because you've been covering it up perhaps for years, and limiting your experience of life, of yourself, of the world. When you shut yourself down into this tiny thing to fit in with the world, then let's say there's only 10% of you still functioning and being public, then you forget about the other 90%. And what you're closing down is not just the pain. What you're closing down is the joy, the love, the connection, the self-expression. All of the good stuff gets shut down when we're in pain. And reclaiming all of that, I think, allows you to live a much deeper. I mean, I'm feeling it in my guts when I'm talking. My whole body now is just full of love for myself and who I really genuinely am. And it's the kind of love that I might have been denied earlier in my life, and that I may have self-denied in order to make myself convenient to work with for other people, user-friendly.
Yeah.
And I think coming home to that full expression of yourself it's just a wonderful thing, and there's a lot of power in it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think when you were talking about that idea of oneness, it made me think about how we do compartmentalize and like, it's like, it's this kind of, honestly, it's like even like the day and the night, like, is there really a difference? Is it two different things or is it just one thing? Right. But it's just like the cycle, right? It's like the sun goes down but it's all still there. And it's like, you're kind of going in this cycle. And that's kind of how I think about my mental health too, is it's like, for me, it's like, I'm just one. And same with like the shadow side. It's like, I love my shadow sides. And I think that's a framework that if it's not useful for you, for anyone who's listening, then throw it away. Right. That's my whole thing, is like, don't use it. Like and I was telling Dex, like there were a couple people that brought this up even before we did the summit. And they're like, I don't think I like the name because I feel like it might be contributing to this idea that there's something wrong over there. But for me, I was like, that's exactly it though. It's the opposite. For me, like the intention behind this is that this is a part of you that's beautiful, and that, like, because I think the stigma is that, like you said, telling someone like that part is wrong and bad and you need to hide it and it's making me uncomfortable, versus this thing over here. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I want people to be able to realize that there's something beautiful there. And I think that idea of oneness is actually kind of a neat idea. However, I do think we in our brains still tend to compartmentalize parts of ourselves, whether it's the truth or not. Sometimes I think that's how we think, right?
But it's a very expensive way to live, because compartmentalizing takes up a ton of energy. It blocks the energy flow in the whole organism. We put a little bit over there, a little bit over there, and they don't talk to each other. And we have to expend a lot of energy keeping them apart. But also, we're living from only a tiny fraction of ourselves. We're like a cardboard cutout then, walking around in the world. We don't even know who we are by that. We don't even know what we enjoy. And people who come to me in burnout are like this. They're very compartmentalized for safety reasons. I can only keep my job if I compartmentalize everything out like this, like this. I don't tell people about all the parts of me. It's energetically very expensive because we are disunited as humans. We can't integrate and just be one person the same all the time. And it also repercusses into chronic illness in the body eventually. Like the body will break down, the mind will break down, because it can't keep the facade up for a lifetime.
Yeah.
There'll be a crash.
So how do we then, and that's kind of what we're going to be doing with this summer, is talking about how can we support ourselves and connect with all those parts of ourselves and really allow ourselves to stop demonizing the shadow, stop allowing the world to tell you, right, that you're demonizing the shadow. And that's kind of like how I think Sarah Fisk in our interview, she said the same thing. She's like, I don't even think of it as a shadow anymore. It's all just part of me. I'm just one. And
Yeah.
that's the goal. That's what I want to invite everyone into, right? So what would you say, Dex, for people that are like, you know what, I'm done compartmentalizing. I'm done saying, this is my shadow side, this is my light side, this is my work side, this is my home side, this is my private corner. Like, what would you say to the person that really does want to just be one human, one whole human where everything's beautiful, everything's accepted, everything's valuable, but maybe they don't know how.
It's an interesting question because we aren't taught how. But in my practice as a coach, every single thing about my work with men in burnout is helping them reintegrate all their parts, helping them be just one person, helping them have the best possible relationship with every piece of themselves. And there's a lot of techniques for doing that. But I think what we need to do is instead of focusing on the inner critic initially, instead of giving all our attention to what the inner critic is telling us is wrong and should be kept apart, we flip the needle over into, let's look at all the things that are worthy, good, acceptable, where I'm contributing, where I'm being decent, where I'm trying to work with and for the people who are important to me in my life. Let's look at that side that we never ever look at if we're in enough pain. We don't look at the good things in us. I have only two conditions for self-acceptance. One, do I have a good heart? Because for me, underneath it all, that's always true. And the other one is, am I basically well-intentioned? And if those are true, which in my self-assessment they always are, then I'm good enough. That's it. None of the rest of it's important. Only the heart, fundamentally, only the heart's important. So I teach people to love themselves completely, and then they kind of spring back to life when they start accepting all these fragmented parts of themselves. They start to thrive and flourish again. So I teach a bunch of techniques to people, and it's kind of complex. One of the exercises that people might want to try is I suggest to people they find 10 things they appreciate about themselves every day for 1 month, but different every day. And it forces them to look inside and go, oh, what on earth is there? There's nothing. Oh, yeah, well, there's one.
Yeah.
Like for me, it could be that I got out of bed this morning. It could be that I smiled at someone on the street. It could be that I bothered to have a shower. Anything.
Yeah.
It could be that I noticed somebody in distress and just went and gave them a pat.
Yeah.
Anything, right? Anything.
Yeah.
And I think we don't do that. We're not taught to do that. We're taught to focus on where we're underperforming.
And do you notice
American dream, you know, of top 1%. I must be in the top 1% of performers because then I'll be okay. We can't all be there, can we?
Yeah. Do you notice that? So when you start doing these practices of appreciation, just noticing, okay, I know I have a good heart. I know I'm well-intentioned. And as you start to find those things that you appreciate about yourself, do you find that it makes it easier then to look at the other parts just a little bit kinder, or does it make it easier to actually realize why they're there and how to change them? Or do you not even bother asking the question for change? Is that fundamentally damaging?
I pursue change to enrich in my life, not because I think I'm broken and I need fixing. And I think that distinction is really important for me because I have a lot of odd behaviors.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. There's things that
I think that love shines out. What it's really taught me is that the love now shines out of me pretty continuously. I feel a lot of love. I feel it for myself and I feel it for other people. And I feel the connection between me and other people because of it. And I think, okay, don't sweat the small stuff. I may still be a bit weird. And I have social anxiety, and I experience it as difficult to connect with humans. And humans experience it as difficult to connect with me because I'm quite self-protective like that. I just think, oh, well, there we are. I've still got a good heart, and they still know that. They can still see it and feel it in me.
Yes.
And we connect on a non-verbal level. And, oh, well, if I'm still got weird behaviors, never mind you.
Yeah, that's what I asked you, and you asked what was the reason you chose me to participate. And that's what I said, because I felt safe with you, right? I never care if people want to challenge, like I'm always open to feedback and challenge any of the things, but it's like you can feel it when someone's like, this person has a good heart and they're not saying this to attack me or what I'm doing. They're actually saying it's the opposite, to elevate the intention, right? Which is to help people. And I can feel that, right? Like, they're like, Robin, this is a terrible name for this summit. What are you doing? And I'm like, beautiful, let's talk about it. Why? Because if you're thinking it, somebody else is probably thinking it. So can we look at what your experience is of that and look at what my experience is, and then find a way to really allow this to reach more people, right? Because I think when we put away the shame and judgment, which is what you're talking about, when we start to appreciate ourselves, what happens for me when I do that is that the judgment lessens. And
Yeah.
when I'm not judging myself, and I can just I can be curious. I can just put it as neutral and know none of this means that I'm not worthy. None of this means that I'm a bad person. All we're talking about now is math and numbers and or whatever, or how do I want to show up? I can be more curious and actually change, like you said, just because I want to, not because I have to, or it's going to make me a better person.
Yeah. And I think how it works for me is I'm able to see the perfection in each person. It's very easy for me to stimulate my unconditional love for another human because I already know that underneath everything, underneath all the crappy experiences and behaviors they may perceive, is a fundamentally very good person with a very good heart who's fully capable of.
And I think that's what
And I see that in each person that I work with, and I just went, oh, that's terrific. Yeah, I love that.
totally. And
I
that's what
love
makes
it.
you a great leader for them, because you've done that for yourself. And so you can do that for them. And so you can pull out, you can excavate, you can amplify that beauty and help them to see it.
Help them see it, I think, is the big part.
Yeah, because it's already
Help
there.
them connect with the inner goodness in them.
Because they're over here looking and shaming and blaming and believing all these stories. And it's like you can help them to connect with those parts and to see it and to begin to believe it. And I love that. Dex, how can people find more about you?
Oh, just go to dexrandall.com. It's all there.
DexRandall.com it is.
And for people in burnout, I've got a podcast, Burnout to Leadership, which has a lot of practical tips to help you stimulate a better relationship with yourself, a more relaxed and loving and caring relationship with yourself.
Beautiful. I love that. Dex, thank you so much for coming and being here with us today. This was awesome.
Pleasure. It was lovely. Thank you, Robin.
If you enjoyed this episode, take a screenshot of it for me and share it on your favorite social media platform. And in the meantime, I just want to invite you to remember that you are beautiful, that you are worthy, that you belong. See you next time.